Now, I have a gentleman with me who says that he's going to talk about procurement. Procurement, I mean, most of the people wouldn't, I mean, infrastructure, and a lot of procurement goes into infrastructure, right? And he says his company is going to reimagine procurement. Am I right?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, over the last few years, we have seen momentum in India's infrastructure and manufacturing push. But within that growth story, procurement often stays behind the scenes. That's very true. Birla Pivot says it's reimagining procurement, and that it is a procurement partner for all sizes of contractors, builders, manufacturers, etc. Can we start by understanding what this reimagining actually means?
Sure. So thanks, Manoj. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll start by addressing your question. So if you look at it, procurement is essentially one of the most core functions for a project to become successful. And while projects have scaled up both in terms of numbers as well as size, procurement continues to work in a slightly old-fashioned way, wherein it's based on a lot of phone calls, Excel sheets, and WhatsApp. So essentially, thousands of crores of projects are still managed, wherein the procurement is many a times opaque, inefficient, and many a times slow. So when we are talking about reimagining, you are essentially transforming that which is fragmented and manual into an integrated, transparent digital workflow, right? And what it brings forth is essentially a bunch of value adds, starting with reliability of price. So we work at Birla Pivot with the top manufacturers, and we are able to provide reliable price. And why is that important? Today, if you look at it, typically, especially for commodities, which is the dominant use of procurement for any large project, your price reliability is as good as your last conversation, right? The other very essential piece is managing cash flows. So credit is like integrated into a large project. And today, that is usually very difficult to come by when you try and raise money for a project, especially when you're trying to manage working capital. So what we are doing is essentially providing very tailor-made credit solutions. So a buyer is actually aware of the eligibility, the terms, and the actual cash flows even before they actually start making the purchase. And when you combine these two, which is price reliability and cash flow reliability, you're essentially transforming the project from operating in a reactive manner to a more planned manner, which of course has impact on efficiency and cost. The other very essential two more pieces that I want to just bring to your attention is the fact that the assortment. So we have got about say 45,000 SKUs on our platform across 35 plus categories. What it entails is that from all the way to your commodities to behind the wall to the front of the wall finishing, you have everything under one roof. And that's essentially providing access and convenience at scale. And most importantly, I think it is the experience, which is currently, I think, very undervalued, especially in procurement. But today, if you look at it, a buyer once buys has very little visibility on when the material is going to be delivered. In fact, today, a buyer has kind of, many a times given up on timely delivery. They're just satisfied many a times in just getting delivery in full out of the OTIF that is there. So what we are showing is that we have got modules which basically essentially give them an end-to-end visibility of the procurement from the time they place all the way to delivery. So when you combine all these three things, you are moving that opaqueness to a digital workflow. You are essentially building trust. And that's very essential for project. And our vision at Birla Pivot, therefore, is to build the most trusted B2B platform in India.
So during this process, I mean, do the customers have choices, or do you suggest to them that, look, this is the product that is best suited for you in the procurement, or do they tell you that, I want XYZ product? I mean,
So if you see a B2B procurement, it is a very specific procurement. It's not a impetus which is driven by some emotion. Every project will have very clear plans in terms of what material, what grade of material, whether it is a steel, cement, or even the finishing products of tiles, etc., which are clearly there. and on top of that, they would have approved brands as well. So essentially, what you do is that you provide the material which is approved by the by the particular project, but you provide choices, you provide flexibility of payments, you provide efficiency of cost, and very essentially you provide timeliness of delivery. What is very unique about a B2B is you cannot, like if you buy in Amazon, the earlier you get is better. It's not necessarily true in B2B. You have a delivery schedule and you need to stick to the delivery schedule. You need to even change the delivery schedule. For instance, if there are rains, we just passed through a monsoon bout, right? The person has asked for a certain material to be delivered, but if you have to accommodate the changes required by the project, and that's where this digital workflow really plays the difference, because you know what's happening at a project level, you are continuously in touch, and you are able to therefore deliver very timely.
You've articulated why procurement needed to evolve, the complexity, the inconsistency, and the need for reliability and trust. Now, let's unpack the how. When you talk about digitizing procurement end to end, what exactly is changing inside the workflow?
So if you look at it, when you talk about digitizing, it is essentially what you're doing is, as I mentioned before, something which is manual and which is fragmented. You're converting into a system which can take on that complexity through leveraging technology, right? So essentially, what you are doing is you are creating, and it is not just for speed, mind you. It's, as I said, also for reliability, transparency, and very essentially, and that's very key to this, is that it is learning on the go, because there is a certain way in which the system and the business works. So you have to learn how that business works, and the technology has to adopt to that way of working and grow, right? So it's institutionalizing knowledge, and those are the very key perspectives with which we built our tech. So our entire tech stack is built in-house, right, and actually in record time. And I can break it down to essentially 4 key modules that we have built. So we have BP Grid, we have BP Edge, we have BP Experience, and we have BP Vault. So a BP Grid is essentially an end-to-end commerce engine, wherein we have all our sellers, all our catalogs, all our SKUs, all our price points, and essentially it is making it visible end-to-end on a real-time basis at any given point of time, right? The BP Edge is a layer which engages with the buyer. So a buyer has an omni-channel wherein to interact. They can log in, they can even send us a WhatsApp, and it can convert into an inquiry. Even a very loosely worded, WhatsApp can convert into a very, structured RFQ. And that RFQ then is automatically broken down into the sub, SKUs and categories. There is a parallel negotiation which takes place with different sellers. It integrates back and gets back to the buyer within a very few minutes, not hours or days, right? And that's a quick response. Then we have a vault, which is basically a credit underwriting engine. We have tie-ups with multiple financial partners, Aditya Birla Capital and others. And essentially what vault does is it's monitoring more than 100 key points for a transaction. It has 20 plus APIs with which it's integrated. And it's also learning on the go based on the behavior it witnesses, including, say, the payment behaviors that it sees. And it creates a very, active, robust credit underwriting and monitoring engine. And then finally, when we come to experience, it's essentially executing discipline for each transaction, whether it is for OTIF, whether it is for documentation, whether it is for meeting timelines. And when you integrate all of this, essentially, you are able to create that seamlessness which helps you scale fast. Well, if anything is to be an example, our own journey from in 2 years touching a 5,000 crores ARR, I think we are one of the fastest B2B startups in India.
Interesting. So even with good technology, behavior often lags behind. We have seen many tools come into the procurement ecosystem, but adoption has stayed low because people stick to what they know. Why will it be different with Birla Pivot?
So that's a really interesting question, and we actually struggle with it when we initially go. But what we realized very early is that, and it's a very intuitive thing that people are not actually holding off from technology because of complexity. many a times people are not adopting because the user does not see an immediate value in adopting to it, right? So when we went, we actually approached it from that perspective. So when we looked at a site person who's actually taking the delivery or placing the order many a times, they're not looking for another app or another dashboard, right? So what are they really looking for? So essentially what they're looking for is how to reduce their follow-ups, how to stop delays from happening. And essentially, if you sum it up, they don't want surprises, right? Because it brings about chaos. So if you look at it, what we have done is we have built that trust factor that I told about. We've essentially tried to build trust and reliability. So anybody who places an inquiry on us, they get speedy response through Edge, which I said is in minutes, not in hours or days. If they have a material in transit, they know exactly where that material is and when it will reach them, and it's not just an in-transit update which comes to them. And when they close a transaction with us, our grid and our vault would close the loops digitally instead of them having to follow up for documentation. And when this happens, essentially what happens is that their chaos goes away and the efficiency comes in, and that's when they actually adopt. So to address the question that you asked, this is something that we discuss often within our teams, that if you are able to get the right thing to do, the easiest thing to do, the adoption will happen. And the proof for us is the fact that all the buyers that we onboarded last year, on an average, buy twice as much from us this year.
So in a business like this, scale is important, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so you are dealing with a third party, but how is scale benefiting you in the back end in terms of procurement from from the sellers? I mean, and how are you passing it on to your customers?
See, scale, of course, helps us because, the core, and it helps every piece of it, right? Essentially, when scale helps you optimize, it begins with just the price. You are aggregating demand, you are able to essentially command better bargaining power. So if you look at smaller SMEs coming and trying to buy, if I'm aggregating the demand, my ability to pass on price is much bigger. The second piece, which is essentially coming from scale, is obviously the fulfillment piece. When I'm aggregating supply for dispatches or any other place, I'm able to better schedule, more optimally price my logistics and fulfillment. So therefore, I'm able to do a better sense of delivery at a more optimal cost. And even in my investments on tech, the fast, better the scale, better are the ways for which I do ROI. But the good part for us, I would say, is that we have not just dependent upon scale. If you remember, we are coming from the house of Aditya Birla Group, and there is certain things which are like kind of inbuilt. One of the most important things for us is trust that we have been able to establish in the market. That's really there from day one. It's also a value that we have to live up to. Also, the network that is already there. So I think scale definitely adds to a lot of value in being able to provide, I think a lot of benefits in all the areas of price, assortment, as well as delivery.
There is an important leg here, logistics. How do you manage logistics? Because at some point in time, maybe you are susceptible to a third party who will act sometimes pricey. So how do you deal with that?
See, logistics in this space is not, as simple as probably B2C is. B2C, of course, has to operate at scale, etc. Here, there are different commodities. A steel, how it gets delivered versus how a bitumen gets delivered versus how a cement gets delivered versus how, say, a tile gets delivered, right? It has a whole lot of nuances. And for each of it, you need to solve very specifically. And that's just one part of the problem. The other piece is also that, there are a certain dominant, I would say, existing logistics networks that already exist, right? You have to show value at scale for them to start adopting you, because it's each of this has a nuance. Like for instance, in case of simple cases, loading of material most often takes place late in the evenings. So you have to ensure that your invoices and all these documentations are timely there. You need to know the vehicle for it to be tracked, etc. So all this has to be solved at scale. That's point number one. The point number two, which is there, is the fact that you need to have specific vehicles for each of this. There is a certain number of what do you call kilometers that they can travel every day. While you need to solve for it. How we are solving for it essentially is that we are integrating with using our technology with all the sellers who are out there, and that essentially gives us a complete control of all the transportation that is taking place. We have a very advanced engagement with them to ensure that we are timely picking it up. The other piece which we are building is that we are building our own BP logistics, and that has really scaled up. In fact, a significant portion of our business today is fulfilled by BP logistics.
So that again is hired from the market on a long-term basis or something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
So it is aggregated from the market, but there is just like you buy a material, these people are onboarded onto our platform, wherein we actually have a very thorough check on both their behaviors. It helps when we have a network from a group, etc. And additionally, we also do a ability check for them, and we actively monitor, how they are performing, etc. And that helps, improving reliability and delivery.
Right. Now, you've spoken about efficiency, structure, and predictability, but in a marketplace as price sensitive as India, efficiency by itself doesn't always move the needle. Cost still dominates most decisions. So, what do you believe will actually help people adapt? And beyond efficiency, once procurement becomes digital and transparent, what does it unlock next for the wider ecosystem?
Okay. See, you touched upon cost, you touched upon adoption. I think both of these points we have already kind of addressed. So I think cost is something which essentially comes from assortment and scale, right? And aggregation of demand. Your adoption, as I said, comes from you understanding on first principles what are the pain points and solving from them through tech. What you touch upon increasingly is very interesting. What next after efficiency? And I think that's something which is very interesting, because essentially efficiency is not an end goal in itself. Once you start building a tech platform on which the entire transactions take place, beyond efficiency, it should start throwing you intelligence. And that's where I think this industry should be headed at. So what happens is you have your transactions, you have your dispatches, you have your payments, all of which happening on this platform. And then you start, getting insights into material flows, into, cash flows, into risks. And then that's when the unlock really happens, because you start moving from a visibility-based outcome to a foresight-based outcome. You start getting a sense of when does the demand peak, when are there chances of, say, supply bottlenecks, when are there, what are the pricing cycles what are the cycles for, say, pricing or, say, for credit. And then you suddenly move from a procurement function being a transaction function to a planning function. And essentially the unlock is that you insulate a project from the volatility risks. And that would be the next step after efficiency.
You explained how digital procurement pushes the ecosystem forward, creating visibility, intelligence, and eventually foresight for buyers. But that evolution can't happen unless suppliers also see clear, tangible benefits. After all, the supply side forms the backbone of procurement. So I want to explore that dimension. Why should a seller partner with Birla Pivot? What is in it for them, and why would they choose to plug into your platform instead of continuing with their standalone channels and relationships?
Okay. It's true. You have to essentially, while you focus on the buyer, you have to, an ecosystem cannot, kind of sustain if you do not balance both the sides. And our suppliers are a very key stakeholder for us. And we offer a lot of value adds for the supplier. In fact, I'll kind of will highlight on a few of the key ones. See, today, if you look at a supplier, what we are providing to them is structured demand. So why is that it's important? So essentially today, most of the suppliers have very fragmented I would say, channels for sales. They have their own, selling team. You have your network. You have, again, phone calls, WhatsApp, etc. So they don't have a very consolidated view of demand, right? But when they work with us, we are actually giving them a very structured view of demand at a project level across thousands of buyers, across, say, some 400 odd cities, right? So they are able to use that to plan their production better. They're able to plan their inventory planning better. They're even able to, do better dispatching because of this. So that's a clear value add that's there. Another point which I touched on before, that a lot of their time is spent on payment risks, delays in payments. So that's a lot of bandwidth spent for them. When they sell through us, because of our Vault engine, and we are able to provide customized tailor underwriting solutions, they can scale without having to take that additional risk which is there. Um, Another very important piece, and this is something that we are very particular about, is that you have a very clear perspective of performance, because many a times a seller comes to know something has gone wrong because a buyer has called and told him, and it's too late because they have lost that equity with the buyer. Whereas here, when we have they are operating on the grid, which is the module that we have, they have an end-to-end perspective of OTIF, of order pipelines. They have a sense of how the fulfillment is taking place, and they can course correct what's not working and to what's working, and that builds customer relationships for them. Uh, you know, Another, I think, important piece for us is the fact that when we are helping them scale without diluting their brand, they have full control. So they're able to protect their price points. They're able to keep their brand integrity. They're able to even maintain their market position in terms of product positioning, etc. So they don't look at us like a discounting platform, right? Just blindly giving prices. They are looking at us a sales channel which enable them to grow. And that's when, if you summarize, essentially, if I were to just look at all the points, we are helping them sell more, sell better, protect their brand integrity. We are able to, remove friction, and we are essentially also solving for their cash flows. And that's why they work with us, and our wholesaler base is growing exponentially.
One quick final question. I mean, you're part of a big group, and you have started this. I mean, it's a fragmented industry. Once this establishes, and once, I mean, it's already must have been established, and it catches on. Do you think it will take away the business of so many people? I mean, small companies and all that who were traditionally carrying out this function. Is that something that is going to happen?
So actually, it's an interesting question, because that was also a question that was asked of us when we started, right? And if you look at it, it's also the group ethos, which is, if wherever we have been, we've always worked collaboratively, right? If you see, wherever, in whichever place we have essentially added to the value which is there. For instance, if we are there on the supply, we are not replacing any distributor. We are working with them. In fact, our understanding with the OEM is, whenever there is a certain size of project, we'll go to the OEM. When there is a certain size of project, we'll work with the distributor. So we are not disintermediating that. We are actually helping them scale. Similarly, for a buyer, we are essentially helping them reach out beyond what their current network, etc. is. So the core value with which we operate is that we are helping it grow. And one of the key focus areas, if you see, is that the market opportunity is about $200 billion and growing further, of which at least the popular numbers that are floated around is only 2% is actually digitized. So that's a huge white space for everybody to grow into. And I think only collaboratively we will grow and scale. And I think that's where I don't see it wherein we are kind of disintermediating anyone.
Good to hit upon that idea, though. It's something that is, what should I say? You say that something is disrupting the industry. Something like that. But it's very interesting, though. I mean, you are institutionalizing an industry that is fragmented, and
Yes.
but that's really nice. Thank you so much. It was very
Thanks.
interesting, so to speak.
Thank you so much, Manoj. Thank you.